I'm delighted to be able to moderate this. I think this is going to be an incredible conversation just from like the few minutes we've been outside. So first up, I'd like to welcome Georgia Lee, who is the showrunner of Partner Track on Netflix. Next up, yeah, please. Next up, we have Jessica Gao, the showrunner of She-Hulk. And finally, we have Alan Yang, showrunner of Master of None and Luke. Hi, everyone.
Hello, Pia.
I am so excited for all the tea to be spilled on this stage. It's going to be very juicy, I hope. But the first one, and I'm not stealing this from Ramsey, I promise. But the first question I did already have was, what did each of you want to be as kids when you grew up?
Oh, God.
Ooh.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it was. I want to hear the wackiest things.
Great question. You guys go first.
Oh, thanks, Alan. An Olympic figure skater.
Oh,
whoa.
Love.
Yeah.
Did you skate?
I did, not very well, but I did, and I loved it very much. So, I actually just started skating again a few years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
I love that. That's a great answer. I like it.
Thank you.
Jessica?
I initially when I was very little, told my parents I wanted to be an author illustrator because I thought all books had pictures. And they told me, hope you like eating garbage and sleeping in the gutter. And so I said, well, that's not appealing. Then I decided I wanted to be a visual artist, which was totally okay with them. So this is definitely a step up from what they thought I was going to pursue.
I love it. As long as they're impressed and happy.
I mean, they're not really, but.
Alan, how about you?
Now, this wasn't ever really realistic, but I guess a rock star. I was in a rock band when I was younger, and it wasn't very good, but I mean, why not dream, right?
What did you
They were
play?
called the Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah. we did okay. But no, it was a punk rock band. I was like, 17, 18, 19 years old, and it was really fun. But this is a little more practical, not much more practical, but a little bit. So.
I love that you guys all had such big ambitions for very different things, which leads me to my next question. So at what point in your lives, or what was the moment that you realized that you could be telling stories on screen?
I don't think I've realized it yet.
You're kind of doing it.
Yeah. Gosh.
Was there a milestone moment? Was there anybody who you saw who you just felt like, oh, whoa, I could do that?
I think, Alan, you should go first.
I definitely can, because I didn't know this was a job until I was pretty old. So definitely growing up, I grew up in Riverside, California, which is not too far from LA, but I feel like spiritually and creatively and artistically is pretty distant, because there wasn't anyone in that world and in that community who had this job or worked in entertainment or anything like that. Both my parents are immigrants from Taiwan. They certainly were not putting me into showrunner training programs as a kid. So no, I just didn't realize this was a job. I loved watching films and television and comedy and all that stuff, but it wasn't until I got to college. I majored in biology, very practically. And after freshman year of college, I was like, I don't think I want to work in a lab or do anything related to biology. So then I was like, well, what do I actually want to do? Like, what is going to actually make me happy? And so I started doing a couple of things. I started playing in that rock band that I was telling you about, and I started writing for a comedy magazine. And writing for that magazine started making it feel a little bit more real, because some of the people who had written for that magazine went on to write for television, which kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, some of these people went on to write for SNL or The Simpsons or Seinfeld, and it broke my brain.
You were at Harvard.
I was at Harvard, and it sort of gave me the level of confidence or insanity, some would argue, to basically graduate and move to LA and just start writing scripts and see if something could happen. So it wasn't until I was in college, really. Otherwise,
I love that you just downplayed that you wrote for
the
Harvard Lampoon.
Yeah.
It's one of the only comedy magazines, unfortunately, and it's not very well camouflaged, but yeah.
You're the only Harvard person I know who didn't just name drop Harvard.
That's true.
It's embarrassing to have gone, so yeah.
I love that. That's a really fun way into the world. Jessica, for you?
It was definitely after college, because I was a fine arts major, and graduated with this very useless degree because at that point, I decided I wasn't going to be an artist. And I was really into comic books. I had organized comic book conventions in college. So I became friends with this like group of comic book artists who were like all 10 years older than me, had established careers. So I was working a bunch of odd jobs, like office temp and things like that. And I had a freak out, not even quarter life crisis. And I had an intervention for myself where I went to all of them and said, I don't know what to do with my life. You tell me. And they all just said, oh, you should be a writer. And I said, okay, well, I'll take your word for it. And I thought I should write for animation because I watch a lot of animation and it seems like a good transition from comic books. But I didn't know anything about the entertainment industry. I didn't know anybody in the entertainment industry. So I just emailed everybody I knew and I said, I have decided to be an animation writer. If you know how, tell me. And one person wrote back and said, oh, my friend works at Nickelodeon and says that there's a writing fellowship you can apply for. And so that's how I got started.
Love it. Those fellowships are so important.
Really, truly.
Yeah.
Life-changing.
They need to not be cut, hopefully.
Yes, right.
And Georgia, last but not least?
I don't remember when I realized that you could tell stories on the screen. I do remember, though, when I started bossing my sisters around when I started storytelling, I guess. So I'm the oldest of 3 sisters, and I was always writing plays and creating shows and conscripting my 2 younger sisters to be in them. So I think that was always my passion. But
You're the Joe March of your family.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. That's like the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
I get it.
Yeah.
It's always good to have sisters and siblings that you can boss into your work as well. That's the way
they work
to do
for
it.
free. So
there you go. Alan, I actually want to specifically ask you about Master of None because obviously when it came out, it was so groundbreaking, and I think in part just purely because it was so authentic in comedy to see the Asian American experience told through the eyes of Aziz Ansari's Dev. But I'm curious to know what the pitching process was like initially, and if there were any major roadblocks that you came up against, and did it feel monumental when you were pitching it?
It's tough to say that it felt monumental because it sounds very self-aggrandizing. It's like, this is a monumental show. Like, we're going to change the world. I mean, we weren't really sort of cognizant of that in the moment. I think at the time we were aware of the fact that there weren't many people who looked like us on television. That was patently obvious. It was especially obvious when we were kids because we weren't, much less the main characters on shows, we weren't even in shows, right? It was like literally a poo on The Simpsons or something, right? So we knew that growing up, and then we started to make some headway, right? So Aziz and I met on Parks and Recreation, and obviously he was one of the main characters on that show, not the main character, and I think it was truly just a situation where the 2 of us were friends. We really trusted each other. We collaborated a lot, and we worked together on that show quite closely. And it was kind of like, why not? Like, why not do this? And keep in mind, at the time, it's just time really condenses because it feels like a long time ago, and yet it really wasn't that long ago. Like when we did that show, there's literally an episode called Indians on TV where the Dev character is unsure whether there can be a show with more than one Indian guy on it. Like, he literally is like, if there's 2 or 3 Indian people, it's like, it's just an Indian show. Who would want to watch that? And now, not that much longer, since then, it doesn't seem outlandish. But there's literally an episode where that debate was being had, and that's because that was a real debate we had in the writer's room, where people didn't want to pigeonhole themselves. So, it's funny how progress moves both slowly and quickly. Like, I'm so heartened to see other showrunners, other people who look like us represented on screen in many different ways. Superheroes and comedies and dramas and all of it. It's really exciting. So I don't know. It just feels like we've made a lot of progress. We have a long way to go, but it's actually really, really exciting, I would say, from my perspective.
I 100% agree. I think it's, and between the three of you, by the way, you guys are repping so many genres and so many kinds of shows, which makes me just so happy. Georgia, for you, developing partner track from a book and, you know, putting it onto screen, what were some of the biggest things that you had to consider in the adaptation process?
So Partner Track is based on Helen Wan's great book, Partner Track, which was based on her experiences as a lawyer in New York. And Helen is Chinese American, and I'm Chinese American. And so when we cast, we actually really wanted to find a Chinese American actress. And we looked really hard, and it was a very difficult role to cast because we wanted someone who was both believable as an M&A lawyer, but also very vulnerable. And it was challenging, and we wondered if we should open up casting to all Asian Americans. And it was a big conversation, and we thought, well, why not? Let's just do it. And we found Arden Cho, whose her tape, her audition was really powerful. We thought she was really the character. And then we had a whole debate about, because Arden happens to be Korean American. So we had a whole debate about, well, what to do. And we wondered, should we change the, should we make Arden play Chinese American? What should we do? And we ultimately decided to change the character to be Korean American. So the character Ingrid Yun is now Korean American. And I had a conversation with Helen to make sure she was okay with it, the author. And it sparked a really fascinating conversation about casting. Because I spoke to some of my, and I know we've chatted about this too, Jessica, so I'm really curious about your perspective on this. I spoke with some of my actor friends, and the opinion is quite divided. Should Chinese Americans just play Chinese Americans, or can any Asian play any Asian? And it's, my writer's room had one opinion, my actor friends had another. It was really, I'm kind of curious if you guys have had this experience.
Yeah, before I did She-Hulk, I had a pilot at ABC, and it was based on my family, and I'm Chinese. And, it's a big ensemble cast, and when by the time we finished casting, half the actors were Korean American. And they were all wonderful, but it was one of those things where I had to think about and talk about, have a lot of conversations about whether or not that would be okay. And for me personally, I'm not going to begrudge an East Asian person another East Asian role just because there's not enough opportunity. This would be a totally different conversation if there was tons of opportunity for every type of Asian person, but there isn't. And so I'm not going to close off an already small window of opportunity for people because of that. I think this would be, obviously the solution is let's have enough opportunity where everyone has tons of roles to choose from, and then we can get really specific. And when we get to that point, then this would be a completely moot conversation. But until we get there, I don't want to be the one to close off that opportunity. I think it's perfectly fine, as long as it still works, I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's different if you're I'm sure there's very specific situations where it would not be appropriate, but in general, my philosophy is open it up.
Alan, how about you? What do you think about
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue we come upon all the time because it's the field, right? It's the pool of applicants. It's just not, hey, this is a 40-year-old white guy or something. You're going to be able to find a 40-year-old white guy, theoretically speaking. But I think it's very character specific, as Jessica said, right? There's instances where, hey, this person needs to speak fluent Mandarin and needs to be, in that case, look, you're probably going to cast a Chinese person, right? Now, if you move it down the road and it's an 8th generation Chinese American person who never speaks Mandarin in the show, and it's, it starts getting a little bit grayer, the area is a little bit grayer. So I think it's really, really role specific, and I agree. I mean, the goal is for us to get to a point where, much like European actors, it's look, a Spanish guy can play a French guy. It doesn't really matter. That seems okay to everybody, right? So if we can get to that point, that means there's a plethora of opportunities for everybody, and we're not experiencing the amount of, blockages and boundaries that we're experiencing now. So we have a ways to go, and I'm sympathetic to everyone casting, and I'm sympathetic to everyone auditioning for these roles. Because by the same token, you could say like, oh, I'm Japanese, they didn't cast a Japanese person, like, I'm really pissed. I get that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I see the showrunner director's perspective, which is like, we have 10 applicants for this or 10 people auditioning, and they're not quite right for this one, so is it okay for me to be flexible? There's no clear-cut answer, but I think if everyone's well-intentioned, it's okay. So
I also, and also, like, I don't think either way is wrong.
Exactly.
Like, I think that if you're like, I very specifically need to have like a Japanese American person play this Japanese American character, that's totally right, And if you're like, you know what, I'm totally open to all East Asians playing this character, I don't think like there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's whatever you're comfortable with, whatever is going to work for this role. And really, at the end of the day, I think all the answers to anything we talk about is we need more opportunity for everybody.
Definitely. I think it always keeps coming back down to that. But I do feel, because certainly the social media vitriol can be pretty loud and pretty aggressive. So I do feel for the people who are in these, in your positions, who have to kind of weather that, as well as the realities of, what the scene is like. So I totally get that. Jessica, you've had to step into the world of a multi-billion-dollar franchise with Marvel. And I'm very curious to know what your experience was taking a property that's so kind of beloved in comics, and knowing that there is a whole film side of the MCU, and then you're bringing this into the TV side of things. So talk us through that whole, process for you, and perhaps what your biggest challenge was in bringing that in.
It's tricky, and you hear a lot of stories about like how much Marvel Control has, and also you can see it in the fact that they've created an entire new way of doing movies where everything's interconnected. So having the benefit of watching that unfold over the course of a decade, I already had some sense of like, okay, this is not going to be a regular job, And so in order to protect myself from heartbreak, my mindset going in was, I'm a custodian for this property. I'm basically this nanny, so for their baby, and I can love this baby and protect it and nurture it and grow it and try to turn it into like a great human being. But at the end of the day, at some point, I have to hand this baby back to its parents, And that's really kind of the mindset I went into with that. It surprisingly wasn't super difficult to get used to the way they were doing things, because like everything, you kind of just have to ask. That really is the only difference. And to a certain degree, you have to do that at an ACE studio, so it wasn't like that different. What was really pleasantly surprising about working with Kevin Feige is that he's he doesn't put any limits on things when you start pitching and when you start working. So the philosophy there is kind of just like, yeah, you're free to pitch anything and we're free to say no. So there is a little bit of a freedom to that, but nothing was more apparent to me that this is part of a bigger thing than just my rinky-dink little show, my rinky-dink little 9-figure show, is when we got into casting, because I realized as the casting conversations were going on, I was like, oh, they're not just casting for a sitcom. They're casting for the next 10 years of movies. Like, they're casting for who their next big A-list star is going to be. And it's like, there were many little points where I had to like remember like, oh, this conversation isn't just about this show. This conversation is about the future of the MCU.
Yeah, which is wild. This thing is just expanding.
Yeah, so I'm exhausted.
I'm very curious to know for each of you, what is the best and worst part of being a showrunner? Alan, you go first.
I'll start. The worst part is what Jessica just mentioned, is the exhaustion, because it's a lot of jobs. It really, you're really in charge of a lot of aspects of making the thing. Essentially, you're not just the director of an episode or something. You are making sure that the story is cohesive, and you're ideally in charge of essentially every creative aspect of the show. So that's actually a good and a bad thing, right? Obviously, it's a lot of work, and that can be difficult, but You know, the best part I think is the flip side of that coin, is like you get to touch every aspect of production, and you get to work with every department head, and you get to collaborate with so many incredible people. You know, on a show like Jessica's, it's hundreds, if not thousands of people, right? It's from the genesis of the show with you and the writers, and then there's all of these different phases of production. So there's pre-production where you're writing and planning and doing all that stuff, hiring people, building your team. There's actual shooting, and that's its own beast where you're on set and you're managing, you're hiring directors, you're working with all those department heads, you're making decisions down to the length of the shorts of the background actor in scene 4 of episode 7. You know, like that, you're getting that granular. You're picking the color of the wallpaper if you want. You can get that granular. And then in post, you have a whole different job, which is to supervise the editors and figure out VFX and mixing and coloring and all that stuff. It's a long, long process, and as the showrunner, you're one of the few people, if not the only person, who touches every aspect and ideally exerts not control necessarily, but you give the people the sandbox to play in, and ideally you're collaborating with really talented people who show you things you didn't even know were possible, right? So that's really a great part of it, is I find the collaboration aspect, which is different from film in some ways. So I really enjoy that aspect of the job. The other part is being really tired. So
It's a great job if you're a control freak.
exactly. Yeah. That's what I slowly got to. I realized, like, am I a control freak? I was talking about the color of the wallpaper.
Good to learn that about yourself. Yeah.
This is a therapy session for me primarily. This is all when Nathan Fielder saw rehearsal for me.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the best part and the worst part is how Alan put it, which is, you know, the buck stops with you. Like everything, you know, like you are responsible for everything, but also you're responsible for everything. You know, it's kind of like, it's great if you have a vision and you have a voice and you know what you want to do, and then it's up to you to like work with everyone to do the ultimate group project and come up with this thing. If you don't like that kind of responsibility, it's a nightmare, because when you leave the writer's room at the end of the day, like you don't get to just shut off and be like, oh, I'm clocking out mentally. Like it will live with you for every waking and sleeping moment of your life. But if that's what you want, it's the best.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
I would say that is the worst and best, absolutely, which is that we never get to turn our brains off. It's just, it's constant, right? Yeah, and a lack of sleep. I love sleep so much. I love sleep more than ice skating. And so, yeah, the lack of sleep, especially during production, which is an absolute beast, is very taxing. But the best part is everything that you guys have been saying. It's collaborative. I think TV versus film especially. You're living with this entire cast and crew for 8, 10, 12, 20 episodes, hopefully from season to season.
Yeah.
So it truly does become like a family. And one of the most rewarding things is, I mean, without being too grandiose about it, you feel like you are making an impact at some level, both in your cast and crew. More than one of my actors said they thought about quitting acting before they got the role.
Wow.
Yeah, actually more than one of my 5 stars said that. Yeah, and then the other thing that's been really wonderful is I think we're so busy making it that when it comes out, you just suddenly are startled that it's in the world and that people are seeing it. And when there's a positive response, it's really very heartwarming. There was the thing that impacted me the most was the poster for Partner Track has Arden Cho in a pink suit walking amongst a sea of like blue suits, dudes, men, and this one mother took a photo of her young daughter, who I want to say is like 6 or 7, in a pink suit, and she's walking forward with like, and she comped that into, and I saw that and I started crying, and I was like, oh, this is all the sleepless nights is actually worth it.
That's what you're doing it for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is so inspiring. Like all of your shows have like just even me as an adult, you know, like being able to watch it and see it. It's so inspiring. Like even I can think bigger about, you know, what I want to do, and I'm a full grown up. So, yeah, it's important. I'm curious to know what maybe has been the toughest conversation you've had to have with executives, studio heads in your showrunner roles.
Well, very specific to this summit, I would say is anytime we have to talk about issues with race, because there is a certain type of white executive who, the moment you start bringing up a race issue, they immediately get defensive and like the first thought is like, are you calling me racist? And it's like, if I'm bringing up a race issue to protect this show, and the first thing you say is, are you calling me racist? Then yeah, you are 1,000% racist. That's confirmation you are capital R racist. Like, if that is your priority, 100%. So like, and I remember complaining about it to someone who said to me, well, you know, like, in my, you know, in there, who was a white person who was like, you know, but, you know, in my experience, like, even like, two executives of color, they're not going to agree on every race issue, you know? And I was like, but that's not the point. The point is that I can be comfortable and feel safe bringing up these issues, and we can have a conversation, we can have a dialogue about it without someone immediately flipping out and getting all like weird, like protecting their own white fragility. Like, that is the point. The point is that we can talk about it and bring it up. So I would say like that is the thing that still frustrates me the most.
That sounds outrageously frustrating, and I will say that does filter through to some other industries too, so I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really bad.
I was like, that's really bad.
That's tough. That's like, their ego's up. No, and I think a less fraught conversation, but still difficult, is when you're getting notes on something, right? And when you're not seeing eye to eye on whether it's a pilot cut or a script or you know, what you want for reshoots or whatever. I tend to be an optimistic person who like can't help but seeing the bright side of situations like that. And for me, I usually take it as an opportunity to try to Jedi mind trick them and convince them that like they were right about something the whole time, but I didn't change anything or whatever. Like that's
you
like
being very clever.
But that's a real part of the job, and I neglected to mention this in the previous answer. A lot of the job, besides the creative aspects and the management aspects, is making people feel heard and managing people's egos, whether it's your talent or your directors or your executives. And so when you're dealing with the president of the studio or whatever, and they have notes on your thing, and you're in a 2-hour-long meeting with them, you really want to get to a point where they still give you the freedom to do what you want to do and trust your creative instincts, but you also want to make them feel like they're heard. And I think that applies to a lot of different industries, right? Yes. So I think it's a difficult situation sometimes, and sometimes, look, you're not going to come to an agreement, but I found that it is productive to just continue the conversation and really try to hear what they're saying. And look, maybe you won't agree at the end of it, but it's been my experience. Maybe, again, I've been very lucky in this respect, but you can find a way forward, and then everyone's happy at the end. Like, I've literally gone through that experience where someone's very unhappy, and then by the end they couldn't be happier, and they're calling you a genius. But really, you were right the whole time. Well, who knows, right? It's a give and take.
You were right the whole time.
But yeah, but you never know, right?
Yeah.
It's really nobody. This is not an objective science. The science is an industry I got out of. This is a very subjective world. And so no one's opinion is fact. It's all a matter of taste. And so that's something else to keep in mind, I feel like, as you traverse the territory is, you know, look, ultimately you hired me for my taste and my work ethic and my ability to manage the show, so you have to have some faith in me, is sometimes what it comes to at some point.
Very wise words of that.
Yeah, I feel like I just watched that Harvard education.
That's where that went. I see it.
I was just thinking the same thing.
The only thing I learned is to sweet talking your professor. I didn't do the paper, but what I would have done, a B+, pretty good.
Kids, don't listen to it. Yeah, Georgia, how about for you?
Well, I just wanted to comment on one of the things that you said about trusting your instincts. I think that was and we were just talking about that outside. It was one of the hardest things for me to learn. I'm still learning, which is they have hired us for our instincts. And often when you're receiving notes and having that negotiation, I fall into the trap of trying to be the people pleaser and wanting to be the good girl and, not wanting to make waves, not wanting to cause a scene. At the end of the day, they hired us because they want our creative instincts, and knowing when to pick your battles and really hold the line has been one of the big learnings for me in season 1. I think receiving notes and trying to negotiate notes with the studio and the network is super tricky. There's I can't swear on this thing, can I?
I don't know, Janet?
Janet?
Swear, Janet? Yeah.
We're all adults here.
Janet's like, I'd like to see this off color. Let's get this a TVMA.
Do it.
Are there
Swear
children
away.
here? Yeah.
No, you're good.
Well, they say there's 3 stages of receiving a note. I heard this from an actor. The first stage when you receive a note is "fuck you," and the second stage is "fuck me." Like, why am I even doing this? Like, I suck. You know? And the third stage is "excuse me, what did you say?" And so, I definitely go through all those stages. I feel very defensive whenever they give us any note at all. And one of the things one of my friends had told me is like, well, remember that the network is not a monolith. It's a bunch of people. And so try to engage them and listen to them. And, everybody wants to be heard and engage in a conversation. And that has been, I think, the biggest learning for me over season 1. Yeah.
That's
was
awesome.
not to get very defensive, but it's hard. It's hard. I usually get stuck in the first stage. So.
I think we may benefit from the Alan Yang management course here. So the term representation gets thrown out a lot now, and I don't, as an English major, I'm still not entirely sure what that always means. I get confused about because it means so many various things, and most of the time it can kind of be tokenized, It's redundant nowadays, but like diversity being an old wooden ship, as they said in Anchorman. Representation feels very, loose. Don't know what it means. So I'm very curious to know, when you guys hear the term, how are you interpreting it? What does representation mean for each of you as showrunners?
I'll start. It's changed so dramatically even over the course of my career, right? And at a certain point, I think early on for us, it was like, anything. Like, oh my God, like all the background part. Like, I saw a guy in the background speaking, whatever, right? That's like, well, that's how it started, right? Then it was like, okay, we got a toehold. We got some, hey, it's a recurring part, or like, hey, there's the 6th lead on a show. Now, I really feel like for me, the bar is like, let's make it amazing. It's not enough to make something. Like, let's make something so unbelievably great. I know that's difficult, but like, that should be the goal. It's not just representation, but like, let's make it amazing. And I also, by the way, want to say, like, even if something's not amazing and it makes a lot of money, that will count too, because it allows us to make more shit, It's like, so, but I will say, like, that's the ultimate dream for me, is like, wow, can we have our stuff be just as good as everyone else's, and have it really, really be that peak level? Like, that's really, I think, a great goal to set. And we're not always going to hit it every time, but man, that's what I want to feel right now. It's like, have it be really, really amazing. I know that everyone wants that, but it didn't used to be. You didn't used to care. It's like, oh my God, like anybody's on screen, like that's great.
Yeah.
So I think it's a sign of progress that we're now demanding a little bit more.
Yeah, well, we were starving, so we were okay with crumbs. Yeah. And then after a few years of crumbs, you're like, no, I want a meal.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're like, I should be at the table.
Yes.
Instead of getting leftovers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I need French laundry.
I was just
Now we're greedy. We're getting greedy.
Yeah. But I think it might be helpful to think of representation as a spectrum. There's all different types, and it's all encompassed within the spectrum. There's just the visual representation of seeing someone who looks like you on screen, but then there's also matching that so that the representation in front of the camera is also matched behind the camera, so that people at every level making creative decisions, the people writing the checks, like, are all involved. Because the thing is, like, there's not any one of us, any one type of person, any one community that's going to be a monolith. And so the more types of people, the more varied experiences, everyone's going to have, even as Asian Americans, we're all going to have very different experiences. We all have different points of view. It's not like, it's unfair and insane to try to have one person or one property represent everybody, So to me, like, representation is this wide spectrum that encompasses everything, and we just need a little bit of everything, like a tasting menu at French Laundry.
I like this food analogy. With it. It's good.
I'm leaning into this.
I'm hungry.
I'm very hungry. No, I 100% agree with everything you guys are saying. And bringing it back to the casting conversation, what you said about we have arrived when there's so many roles that we can afford to be specific, that it's that there is such multiplicity and a cornucopia of roles. And I love what you said about it's not just the people in front of the camera, which we love and we need more of, but Hollywood is an entire ecosystem, and we need executives. Actually, on Partner Track, we had three Asian American female executives, so it makes it much easier to have conversations. Agents, managers, PR. Janet Yang as the head of the academy, which is amazing. Like, this is, I think, that's when we'll have full representation.
I agree. I think it's so much about making sure we are represented through the infrastructure of Hollywood, which I know has been changing a lot, but I think we still have a fair ways to go. Yeah. So, but it's good to see it happening. Which leads me to my next question, really, about the sort of overall state of the industry. As we continue to evolve and as Hollywood is still weathering these sort of unprecedented times, and we are ahead of a possible recession, one of the early victims of cost cutting that we've seen a little bit of things playing out right now is diversity initiatives and diversity pushes and, projects that are very diversely led. So as showrunners and as creators, what are you kind of perhaps most concerned about for like the upcoming year or two? And how are you sort of planning to navigate as things change?
That seems like a bad idea. Definitely shouldn't be cutting diversity programs. But no, I think those programs are incredibly valuable, as Jessica already stated. And I think, I've talked to Mindy Kaling about it. She was hired as a diversity hire on The Office. And it's like, well, pretty sure she was better than a lot of people who would have been hired through a quote unquote normal process if you looked at what she's created over the course of her career. So, look, I think being an entry-level writer or starting from scratch in this business is unbelievably difficult. And we've seen it get even more difficult over the course of what's happened with television. So that in television specifically, seasons of shows are way shorter. There are a lot of shows, certainly, but you can no longer kind of sit on one show. I look at the writers on our shows and they have to hop around. You have to get multiple jobs. It's not good enough anymore to get on one show. You have to get 5 shows, 10 shows. Like, I'm not joking. So it's not getting any easier for writers. So I think it would be really folly to sort of discard these programs and really hurt people's ability to get that first foot in the door, because even after you get that foot in the door, there's a long road ahead. And I don't know. I know that money is tight, but it feels like anything we can do to mentor and to sort of introduce people who don't look like the people who've always done it in the door is going to be really important, especially as everything gets cut over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, it's something that's also very worrying is these short season orders, these mini rooms, like the opportunity for young writers who fought to get in that room, but now the opportunity for them to move up and learn is also starting to shrink too. The length of time in the writer's room is so much shorter. The staffs are getting smaller, and also because of these short season orders, they're not getting any experience in production, in prep, in post-production, like none of that. So you have an entire generation of writers who are not getting the training that they need, because being a TV writer is an apprenticeship. Like you can only learn this stuff by doing the job, and by getting rid of all the opportunity to actually apprentice and learn how to do that stuff. You have an entire generation of writers who aren't getting to learn the skill sets and the on-hand experience, hands-on experience in order to become a showrunner. And it's a huge problem, and I only see it getting worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because getting in the door is already hard enough as a staff writer at the junior level. And then the other thing that the WGA had also looked at, I think some of the diversity committees, is that there is a fall off in the mid-level to upper level in terms of diversity.
Yep.
And how can we create programs to not just help staff writers get in the door, but also how do you support and nurture and mentor writers who are at that mid-level to upper level. And this issue of not being able to have writers on set has been, I think every showrunner has been worried about it. And what's weird is as we sit here, we're in a position, which is, I think, new for me at least, that we, I guess, have to stand up to the networks and or come up with creative solutions to get those writers on set, because otherwise they can't advance effectively through the ranks. Yeah.
Yeah. Good answers, guys. I know I feel pretty confident knowing like you guys are in it, you are showrunners, you are like leading the charge in so many ways, so I feel pretty confident about that. My one last question for you guys is, what is one story or property that you're dying to get your hands on and tell down the line? It could be anything.
Story-wise, well, I can tell you something we're really excited about. I'm actually producing a show that
you better be breaking news here.
Well,
first.
Yeah, we can't announce it. So keep this under your hats. But no, we are producing a show that very simple logline. Imagine Breaking Bad or Ozark, but set in Koreatown. And
Yes.
It's an Asian American.
I love it.
Just intense crime story.
Yeah.
You think about all of these shows, and we don't have one of those. We don't have one of those. And really something that with a really broad appeal that's very culturally specific. It's about two brothers and the relationship between an older Korean brother and a younger Korean brother, and how it manifests in this larger world. I mean, look at all of these amazing shows we have set and movies set in the world of Italian American crime or the world of whatever, and we don't have that aspect. So we have sold that show, and we're hopefully going to go make it. So that's one that I'm definitely excited about for the future.
Obsessed. More Asians being bad,
Yes.
please. I want more crime. One more edge.
Well, I really wish I had gone first. I'm working on something similar, but in the San Gabriel Valley.
There we go.
About Chinese people.
They can both exist.
Yes, exactly.
Incredible.
That's different.
I want more. We need all of it because they're also so like culturally so specific
Yes,
as well.
so
So they'll be
specific,
different.
yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that's what you're working on now?
Yeah.
Okay. I love this. This is good. We're getting lots of good tea.
That's great.
Which, by the way, it didn't have to be something you're already doing. It could have been anything,
No.
but I love these.
Well, I guess I'll talk about something that I would like to.
Yes,
I don't.
please.
If anybody out there knows it, please tell me.
Throw it out.
I love Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
Science fiction and space opera is my jam. Like I just love it. I grew up on The Expanse, right on the 100. I just love science fiction. So I'm looking for a great science fiction space opera novel series that I could adapt.
Amazing.
So if anybody, that's what I'm looking for. That's my dream.
It's good to know.
Yep.
Let's
This
produce
is-
it.
I feel
Let's
like
produce
this
it.
is-
I mean,
We
you should have to say something that you want to
We
do.
can all collaborate. We can all collaborate. Man.
This is
And it can
very
be funny
good.
if you're on
Yeah,
it.
There you go.
It's exactly the room to
Funny
put
and
it out in. There are people here who can make things happen. I know it.